Hello and welcome everybody to Tadaima and a conversation between Jon Yamashiro and myself, Emily Hanako Momohara. I just want to thank Kumar for being in the background here, making sure everything runs smoothly, and all that she's done actually for the festival. And then also John Tonai for inviting me to have this conversation with John. So I just want to start out and kind of introduce myself. I am a photographer originally from Seattle, Washington. I make work about social justice, and I have done extensively work about the incarceration camps specifically as well. Those of you in California may have seen a show, a two-person show at the Japanese American National Museum of my work called Sugar Islands. It was two-person with Laura Kina. And I'm currently an associate professor at the Art Academy of Cincinnati. So both John and I are joining you from the Eastern time zone on this lovely Friday evening. And I'm just really excited to actually sit down and talk about work with John. I've not done that before about this specific work, even though we've both photographed in the same places, and this is going to be really exciting. So I am going to pass it to John and let him introduce himself.
Oh my gosh! So hello everybody. My name is Jon Yamashiro. I guess I teach at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. Right now, I've been there. It's my 28th year, so that's kind of a long time. And I teach photography in the art department. But I think for me, I can go way back, Emily. You want me to go way back? Because I think it makes.
How far is way back?
Well, I mean, okay, so I was born and raised in Honolulu, Hawaii. So, I mean, I grew up, for the people in Hawaii who are listening, I grew up in Mo'iliili, right down the road from University of Hawaii. And then until I was fifth grade or something, and then we moved to Aina. And I went to Iolani School. Everybody in Hawaii always asks you, when they meet you, if you're from Hawaii, they ask you, what high school did you go to? So I went to Iolani. And then I went to Washington University in St. Louis, where I got a BFA in photography. And then went back to Iolani. I taught several years at Iolani, which was awesome. And then I went to graduate school at Indiana University in Bloomington, where I have an MFA. And then a few years after that, I made my way to Miami, and I've been there since. So that's kind of my short resume, academic resume, I guess, right? And I have actually, Emily talked about her work and a little bit, but I wasn't really involved in this kind of work early on in my career as much. So it's kind of it's not new, but it sort of was a different path that I took to get to where I am with this work. So we can talk about that, I guess, when we get into the photographs, right? But
yeah, let's show our first slide, and then maybe you can, John, tell us, how did you decide to visit the World War II incarceration camps?
Okay, so
because it's not part of your history, your family history, right?
That's right. So, but growing up in Hawaii, I always knew about the camps on the mainland, because my heroes growing up were the soldiers in the 42nd and the 100 Battalion. So at Iolani, right across the street, is the 100 Battalion Club. So I learned about the camps through those guys, I guess, in a sense, right? Being interested in that, learned about the camps. I think it was Daniel Inouye who told the story about taking some of the boys when he was, I guess, they were the training, and he went to one of the camps with one of the guys who volunteered from the camp. And it really struck him then that he knew, I think, because there's a group of boys from Hawaii, a group of boys from the mainland, and they're totally different experiences, right? Growing up in Hawaii and then growing up on the mainland for the Japanese. But it really, I think, made an impression on him that these boys from the mainland had volunteered from prison camps, basically, right? And I think that really shaped the way he saw. I think after that, it changed the relationship between the local boys from Hawaii and the mainland boys, right? So for 42nd, we made up of those two groups. But that was kind of an important story for me. I remember that growing up, and so I always had that curiosity. I wanted to see these places, these prisons, these camps that the Japanese were in during World War II. But I never really had a chance to explore that until so it's always been in the back of my mind. And then around 2004 or 5, I was looking for a project to do. This great book came out. It's called The Art of Gamang. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but Delphine Hirasuna, I think her name was, who did it. And it's a wonderful book of objects made in the camps. So at the time, I was making still life photographs, and I was using cultural objects from my grandma's house, and objects that sort of represented Okinawan history. So actually, I'm full-blooded Uchidanchu, so Okinawan, right? So that's my history, and I was getting things, collecting objects that sort of referenced my past, and I was building still lifes, and that sort of. I was finishing that group of work, and then that's when I started to think about maybe something else to do. And I thought about the camps, but at the same time, my daughter was, I think, 6 or 7, 2006, 2007. My son was younger, but my daughter was running into. She was realizing that she looked different in this community that we were growing up in, and so the way she looked was becoming something of importance. And she was getting up. She was coming home upset sometimes because her classmates would say something about the way she looked, and she didn't look like her mom. Her mother is English, German background, so my kids are Hapa, right? So anyway, that sort of happened. And I thought, and I came to the realization that, wow, I mean, my kids are being affected by this, and they will be affected by sort of the way they look. And I better think about sort of figuring out a way to sort of talk about where they're from, what their identity is. And so it coincided with this idea of maybe exploring the camps. I wrote a little grant. Miami gave me some money to sort of explore this idea, and I had no idea what I was going to do at first. So we were going to spring break 2007. We tried to take a spring break trip to Jerome and Rower down in southern Arkansas. It's like the spring break you want to take, right? Let's go to southern Arkansas. But I had my kids with me, so I didn't know what I was going to do, and they came along. And then we showed up at Jerome. This is the first place that we went. It was hard to find. It was small. It was the front of a farm, right? And you can kind of see it. It's all farmland back there, but this was the only thing in the front there. And I was walking around and sort of trying to figure out what to photograph. And then to document the situation, I had my 4x5 camera with me. I probably just told the kids, hey, stand in front of the monument, right, and I'll make a photograph of you. It was nothing like special. I thought I was just kind of documenting the moment. I had the 4x5. In the background, you can see a little chimney. That's the power plant sort of chimney, because the field is sort of flat and it has that chimney sticking out. Anyway, and so I made those photographs. And then 15 minutes down the road is Rower, and photographed there. So we were there for 3 or 4 days. So it was kind of a long time. I photographed for like 2 or 3 days. Jerome, there wasn't much here, right? But at Rower, can I tell another story? I mean, I have no idea. I mean, can I just keep going?
Well, let me ask about this picture before we leave Jerome here.
Okay, good.
So you've got a picture of, and first of all, I want to apologize to everyone in the audience because the dates are not correct on Jon's work, and I put together the slideshow. So
yeah. Can I just say the dates are okay because they're different versions, but yeah. So this work was photographed. So photographers can do this too. They are different sort of. I made the photographs in 2007 to 2009, but then during subsequent printings, I might have had that date on there because this print might have come from a later time,
Gotcha.
right?
Okay.
So I mean, it's fine, but this was photographed during 2007, 2009. But
Okay.
yeah.
So with the kids, I
Yeah.
mean, I'm wondering what brought you to photograph them standing in front of this monument? How did they become part of this documentation
Well,
project?
yeah, well, like I said, they were there, right? And I mean, no, I mean, seriously, it sounds really lame because because they were there, and I wanted to document the fact. I had probably said, and they probably weren't happy. And there's a story about Lydia realizing at this moment, at this time, what this place was. And I think it's a really powerful story that my wife tells, because my wife and Lydia had a conversation about that.
Do you
Because
want to tell that story? Yeah.
I can kind of tell a story. I mean, we showed up and we drove up, and it was just this, right? But I think she felt the sadness there. It was weird. I mean, I guess I wasn't jumping around happy and all that either. I was sort of, it was kind of a weird feeling. It was the first place we went. And so she asked my wife, why is Dad so sad, or why is it so sad here, or something like that. And my wife explained the situation and why we were making these trips and why this monument is there. And so she I think got, for the first time, emotionally, like, you mean I would have been in the prison too if if I was alive at that time? And my wife had to explain to her that yes, that she would have been, but that she would be with her. We would have stayed together as a family, right? And I think from that point on, which is the beginning of the project, I think Lydia was she was learning, I was learning, she was learning about herself and her history, and I think that was really sort of good for her. But at the time, she was being hit by these sort of ideas that were really kind of powerful. And so she broke down and cried and stuff, and it was really, um, it was sad, right? The whole thing. And maybe that was part of why she has that expression in this photograph. And I probably told Luke to sort of hug her or something. I mean, I don't know what I said exactly, but then I documented this. And as you know, in photography, sometimes you want to say you get lucky, but sort of instincts kick in, right? And you say, stand here and just look at the camera. Don't smile, don't smile. And we made a couple photographs. So I made this the 4x5. So I set the 4x5 up. It took a long time, but and I didn't know at the time that I was going to do it. So I made all these photographs to tell a story, I guess. And I'm shooting film, so I brought it back home and I processed the film and made the contact sheets and I made some prints. And I made some other work that was really horrible. I mean, it was just, I had the history of like all these other photographers making photographs at these sites, and I wanted to try to make something different. I'm just not going to go in there and photograph what was there. And one of the questions I dealt with too was, an important question for me at the time was, how do you photograph today about something that happened in history and make it relevant to people looking at the photographs today? So how do you photograph history, right? Sort of, and make it applicable to people. How people I want people to relate to the image, right? They want to relate to sort of the time. So, and I didn't realize it at the time, but then I saw it and I made this print. I thought, oh my gosh, there's something here, right? As opposed to all the stuff. I tried to make still lifes there. There's nothing there. I tried to do I tried to make art, and I tried to figure out what I was going to do, but it ended up being this photograph I made as a document that really started the whole sort of process of consciously making the project the way it has turned out. Does that make sense?
That's really interesting because I have a quote from Jennifer's writing.
Yeah.
So John's wife, Jennifer Yamashiro, is an art historian and an excellent writer. And there's an article that will be coming out. It's not out yet, so I'm not going to cite it or anything. But I stole a couple sentences to that she writes about this picture that I think are really poignant, and it kind of points to the story of Lydia's experience as well as the relevance. So Jen says, The top of Lydia's head meets the lines that read, constant ongoing surveillance by the Army. So if we were able to see this larger, we would be able to read what was on that monument. She goes on to say, not only do these lines mark her height, emphasizing her status as a child, they juxtapose these children, my children, with the persons who were held captive by the US military 2 generations ago. So I think that she really does a good idea there of kind of bringing all of that together. It's such a concise, short writing.
It's awesome. It's awesome, and she does that. She did that too with this photograph, and I read there's more to it. And as an art historian, she's sort of trained to make all these connections and things. And I was like, whoa, man. I mean, I wasn't, and truthfully, I mean, I wasn't that smart at the time. Like I'm telling you, right? It just some things just sort of happen, and you notice them later. And I mean, I got lucky. I was fortunate to even recognize what was happening here too, I guess, right? So the process of making photographs in art it's not just a one instant moment. It's a longer process, right? For those who don't understand sort of how photography is art, or the process of making art with photography. I mean, it's all this research that goes into it, and you sort of, and then in an instant you make a photograph, and then it becomes something else, and hopefully it does become something else and more. And that those
right. You don't know what it is when you're taking the photograph. Yeah.
Not really, and not always. I mean, it's instinct. It's an improvisation, especially when you're sort of working with models in a situation. Things are happening pretty quickly, so you're making instinctive decisions.
Yeah. Well, let's go to the next slide, because I think that this one is a really good kind of example of that as well. This really emphasizes the kind of the collaboration between you and Lydia, right? And her sitting there and you directing her. Can you just tell us a little bit about what it was like to make this photo?
This photograph, I always look for that, it's to try to find that sort of that moment, that quiet, that it's like this quiet, reflective moment that you can hopefully create in a photograph where that sort of exists there, right? It's sort of still, I photographed her all over this room. She moved around and we did all kinds of things. This is actually in I think at Delta in Utah, which is near Topaz. It was sort of an outdoor museum, and we got into this old barracks that they had recreated. So this specific one, like I said, I shot rolls and rolls of film because you don't know if we're shooting film and I don't know what I'm getting exactly. But the feeling here and her gesture, I got to say that, I mean, Lydia really was brilliant, a model. She was sort of, she really was receptive, and actually it's timing too, because she's say 7, 8, 9 years old. She'd listen to me, right? And sometimes, most of the time, but she would just be comfortable and hold herself, and it's not like she's acting, but she's almost, in these photographs, they become characters. My kids become characters that hopefully that people can relate to, right? But this is, I mean, she sat there and I was like, oh my gosh, I mean, the light was just beautiful, and hopefully I got something right. I made some exposures. So yeah, when maybe I'm getting off track, but when I made this print, I was like, I love this. It was hard to make, as you can see. It was hard to make photographically because of that light coming in from the windows, right? And it's very contrasty, and it's a really tough print to make. But that softness and that sort of darkness inside and that quiet, I think, really work, and allow people to sort of, I mean, my photographs, unlike yours, which we'll talk about a little bit later, maybe so much, rely on the photographs being a window. Kind of, I want people to sort of step in, emotionally step in. There should be space in the photograph for people to emotionally step in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely does. I mean, when I see this, and especially because, I'm mixed as well. So I understand the racial ambiguity that comes with seeing someone, of my background, and I'm sure that Lydia's getting to know that as well. But when I see her there, photography has a way of being timeless also, right? So you can really, you can imagine that this could be a child in detention on our southern border. This could be a child from 1943, right? Like there's this timeless element, and it really calls attention to all the same issues that are happening now, right? With detention and family separation and all of these awful policies that our country imposes based on race.
Yeah. Well, I mean, thanks, Emily. I mean, that's one of the reasons too that we didn't talk about this, but I chose to photograph in black and white and not color.
Okay.
It was that idea that I wanted it to sort of have connections to the history, sort of have a timeless quality, right? I think it simplified sort of the situations also just visually, but that loneliness and that sort of like the fact that she's by herself in the middle and being hapa is sort of that idea, that loneliness, not belonging to one group and not sort of not knowing where you fit and all those things about being mixed race and hapa, which I've learned so much from my kids and sort of their growth, right? And because that wasn't my experience growing up, so it's an educational journey.
It is. And since you mentioned my work, let's go to the next slide, because it actually juxtaposes two of our images that are somewhat similar.
Okay.
And what's that?
Oh yeah, because okay, cool.
Yeah, so I mean, they're both stairs at Manzanar, but they're different set of stairs. But they're both this idea of what was and what is the emptiness, right? But in this really gorgeous landscape. But I think we're both doing some very different things with our work. And it's funny you say that you did it because you didn't want the color to, you wanted to have the black and white. I actually shot black and white because I wasn't a fan of printing color, and this was in 1999. We still printed color, and digital capabilities were just coming about. And I mean, it was like Photoshop 2 or something at this point, and it was so awful. And so, almost by happy accident, I ended up shooting, this project in black and white.
Well, I think what's interesting, and I'm going to say this because people may notice the frame, right? So you've re-photographed. So you have the original photograph, and you re-photograph that photograph to give it that sort of that quality. You're talking about time, and Emily's so smart, talking about sort of the concept of time and our history and our past, and how things start to disappear. There are a lot of sort of conceptual elements to that work.
Whereas you want people to step in, and mine is more like this artifact that is how I deal with the time is that I want it to contain the past and the present. So it's got the two dates, right? So I've re-photographed the photograph, and information is lost by doing that just through the process, but that's also how time works. So I'm thinking of the photograph as being this kind of artifact that symbolizes the experience, and you want us to really enter into
I'm the old school guy. I'm the old fashioned sort of, because I've never, to tell you the truth, I wasn't photographing like this for a long time. I mean, I love my 4x5, and I love my sort of my 6x7 Mamiya 7 camera, but I was sort of thinking that these would be places to step in. Like I photographed, I think I told you before, like the quality of the sky, sort of in the mood of the photograph, they're all like it's a conscious sort of way to infuse emotion into the photograph, to sort of, but I want people to sort of just like I said, give them space to sort of get in there. And actually, here's something interesting too. I mean, I want to point out, this is Manzanar, and there was a storm coming in, but the stairs that I photographed in this image, they're beautifully done. I mean, this is a staircase to like an important building, and at Manzanar there are, I mean, the ponds and the rock gardens and things are beautiful. They're amazing, and there were artisans there. I think there was a guy. The guy, what's his name? It's Kado. I think what's his name. He sort of built. I think he built a memorial there, but he also used his. He's a cement sculptor, and he built these things that look like wood, but they're actually cement.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and he built this. I have a photograph of a bench that looks like could have been a wooden bench, but it's actually cement, and it's all over. So I mean, there are amazing craftsmen there, and I know how hard it is to build stairs like that too. So I mean, anyway, I mean, there's such a care and then sort of importance to that structure, but it's a staircase to sort of nowhere, to the nothing. Whatever it was disappeared.
Right. And
Yeah.
I remember thinking I had my book Personal Justice Denied with me as I was going to all the different camps. And so I was looking at the maps and where I was, and where I was, this was a staff area. So I was thinking about this administrative building no longer being there, and kind of
Right.
like, there's just this kind of remnant or the ghost of it, right? That still survived or something. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that says something about they become monuments in themselves, really, right? These remnants, these sort of evidence. It's what photography does really well, is to sort of collect that evidence, right? And I'm glad you have this image in here, because a lot of the photographs I made don't have my kids in it too. I mean, I have my kids in the photographs, but I also have photographs like this, which are landscape images, which hopefully still carry that sort of emotional quality with it.
Well, let's go to the next slide, because it's one that has the kids in it.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that the thing that really attracts me to the work with the children is that, well, it's kind of twofold, or it's like a micro macro kind of thing, that I think about the families and the community, right, that was affected. But then I also go in and think about the real people, right? The real folks that lived through this. And I think about my grandma. This was at Minidoka, and so that's where my family was. And I think about my grandmother being a high school student and having to go through this guard station area, and the lives, she was not dressed as appropriately for the desert. I think she brought all her Seattle clothes, but like she's got, you've got your kids there, and they're standing in, right, for those individuals. Yeah.
They hopefully they can. The cool thing about photography, what I love too, is hopefully they are what they are. So they represent themselves, my family, but they also hopefully are stand-ins for maybe kids that were there in the past, like you were talking about. And I love the fact that sort of Luke is wearing his Nike shirt, and he's confronting the camera, and he sort of, and actually we talked about this one real quick, like a second later, this photograph is totally different, and the emotional sort of quality of both their expressions are different. And I like that Lydia sort of is maybe can be seen as a little happier in a sense. She's sort of enjoying the space a little bit, because it was a complex set of emotions that these kids were going through there. I mean, from what I've heard, a lot of the kids that were there too, it was like camp. It was like fun, because they had all this community of people with them, and they were going through school, and they had other kids, and they would go to dances and things if they were in high school. I mean, and that's a complex sort of part of the history of these camps, is that I think the parents really wanted to try to create a normalcy to the environment there, right, for their kids. And some of the kids did have that. Some may not have, of course. But it was harder for the adults. It was harder for the Issei who had jobs, and they had made a life, and now they had nothing. And so as we think generationally, people experience these camps very differently. Um, I ran into one of the tour guides, I think at Heart Mountain, and he was saying, "Oh yeah, I was a kid at Heart Mountain, but I mean, I loved it." And I was like, that's the first time it hit me. I'm like, "You what? You loved it?" He said, "Yeah, all my friends are here and everything." I'm like, and I was thinking, that's kind of true. I mean, really, and um, and maybe sometimes you don't realize it until because there are hardships even after the camps happened, and because of misplacement and loss of everything, and so there are other things happening. But while they were in camp, there were fun moments. There were art exhibitions and things like that, right?
Yeah.
But it was complex, but
I think you illustrate that really nice in this piece because you can see, your daughter is holding a flower, kind of looks like she's like looking at the petals.
Yeah.
But then Luke, he has this really intense gaze,
Right.
almost beyond his years.
Yes. Oh, exactly. Now it's interesting, and photographically, right? We can read into that, and that's important too. I mean, like I said, they become characters in this play or in this series of work, but his expression had to be that, like or else it wouldn't have been. It's not the same photograph, you know.
Right.
I mean, if he smiles the next, or if he like sticks his tongue out even, and the photograph that's totally different.
Oh yeah. No, this is just, his expression is
So
perfect.
so you get, you're blessed, you get lucky, and it's instinctual because you're photographing with film, right? Too, and you don't know what you have until you get back to the darkroom. But yeah, thank
Let's
you.
go to the next slide because we're talking about the real people.
Right.
So when we were talking about this piece, it reminded me that I had photographed, and this was the 2003 pilgrimage. So this was a long time ago.
Yep.
But this is Roger Shimamura and Jerry Arai, who were both children in Minidoka.
Right.
And I thought it would at that same, not in the same place, but at that guard station.
Sure.
And I thought, I have never exhibited this or anything. I kind of took it more to document
the moment, right?
Folks that, I really think are wonderful. But seeing them standing where a guard was, when they were active there, and then also thinking about, your kids sitting there, and then,
right.
These two gentlemen who were the kids, right?
Right. I love that. And were you able to ask Roger maybe his thoughts about being at that camp, or his thoughts now about that?
I've had many conversations with Roger about it. He's processed it through his work a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think I don't want to speak for him, but I do think that he doesn't have a lot of great memories because he was 3 when he was sent there. Okay. But I think it's one of those experiences that just puts such a mark on you that it stays like in your DNA, as you walk through the world. Yeah.
Right. And it might be just like a really like a moment or moments that he remembers, maybe that sort of stick with him. But that's a really great juxtaposition of images. I think is sort of interesting. Yeah. Now, I wanted to say something. I'm learning. I'm like at the beginning of this project for me. I knew what I knew. I didn't know much, right? And so you can do research, but when you go and visit these sites and you talk to people, and like you're learning all the time. So because I'm from Hawaii too, and I don't have that sort of family member that was in Minidoka like you did, I don't have sort of that familial connection. But my kids are growing up in the aftermath of the camps, and that how do I want to say it? It still exists, right? That idea that happened, still exists within the Japanese community, and even outside of it, because even I mean, it's unbelievable. My son was teased or about something to do with World War II, and he was like, 5 or 6 years old, and you don't know where it's coming from, but it's coming from generations of stories from other people, from maybe the Caucasian family down the street whose grandfather was in World War II, and it sort of traveled down. So the kid who sees my son, who looks Hapa, looks Japanese more so than white, gets teased or something about something from World War II. So it sort of travels down. It's sort of an amazing thing that happens, right? And that's why we're still talking about this. And it's important that we talk about this, right?
Yeah, the scapegoating hasn't ended. It continues.
It's crazy. Yeah, it's for me. It's crazy, and like I said, through my kids, I've sort of learned a lot more about how things worked or might have worked. Or I mean, I mean, because I grew up in Hawaii, it was a different experience. But since then, I've talked to my mom, and in Hawaii, there were experiences that she remembers as a child during World War II, which she really had put aside and hadn't really thought about, for a long time. But because I brought it up and we talked about it, she would tell me stories about her experiences as a child in Hawaii. And I was like, wow, I mean, it really must have made an impact on her for her to really remember those sorts of things too, right? So Hawaii wasn't, just separate from it. I mean, they had their own, people there had their experiences also. But anyway, I think I went off track a little bit.
Oh no, that's totally fine. I think we're right on track for time because I wanted to allow 15 minutes for questions, and we still have a couple more slides. So I think we're perfect.
Okay, good.
I'm having a throat issue, though I keep wanting to cough. Let's go to the next slide.
Okay, yeah. So I'll just talk about this. This is Heart Mountain, and I want to make there was a woman who I met at Heart Mountain, Ladonna Zal, who was amazing to me. She met me at Heart Mountain. She took me around personally, and I actually, when I was there, there was a tour group from Hawaii actually that came in, and I was there to meet them, and we talked and things too. So it was interesting, but she was really important for me at Heart Mountain because she showed me everything, right? This is just really off the side of where the monument was, and I'd really had thought the next image is to show that sort of the kids sort of in the camp. I mean, in my head, I had visions or images of like these kids actually running around in the camp and things. And Luke has a glove, and he was trying to play baseball, but baseball was also a really big outlet for the kids there in the camp, right? So I mean, you kind of consciously sometimes put those things in there, and he was just throwing the ball around. So I said, hey, take your glove and stand in there. But and I kept another thing, and so I kept the power lines. If you can see on the top, there are power lines in there, and I like to also sort of those contemporary, sort of modern elements, that you can't avoid. And we haven't mentioned this, but I mean, Minidoka's having their own problems with some things that might happen. But at Heart Mountain, I know that the community was had to really be behind sort of making Heart Mountain what it is today. It's changed from when I was there because there are a lot of people that were supporting like a learning center, and I think LaDonna Zal was one of the people that was really backing it. And but it was a community around the camp that did that, and I think that I found that too at Amachi in Colorado, where the school right there, they had actually classes and students were involved in keeping the place. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, one of the teachers really.
Yeah, his name was Jon something, I think his name. But yeah, but it's the community around it, and then the sort of the internees, kids and things like that who who come in and support it. But the community was so important because this land was all sold off. A lot of it was sold off to private farms, and so like when I went to Minidoka, You had the guard station and you had a little space in the middle, but around it was private property. And there were signs that said, please do not.
So, that
Yeah.
property was actually lotteried off to
Yeah.
veterans, right?
Right.
Not Nikkei veterans,
No.
but other World War II veterans
Yes.
could win that land. Yeah, actually
Yeah.
at Minidoka, there is the property line has expanded.
Good.
And now one of those farms, the Herman Farm, their house was part of this government program, Farm in a Day, where they came out and over a weekend they built a house for the farmer that had he actually lived. He and his wife lived in the old fire station, the Minidoka fire station, until this house was built. So now actually they're using that house as a ranger center. Like you can go in there and they have some offices and some skills there. Yeah. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah. Well, they did that with all the barracks too. Because, and there was a wonderful project. Somebody, I can't remember his name, but he did a project where he photographed what happened to the barracks.
Oh, yeah, I remember that as
Yeah,
well.
that's amazing. That's a really amazing thing. But I actually did see when in Tule Lake too, we sort of I saw that, you see these, and we talked to people who actually grew up in one of the barracks. Yeah, I grew up in one of the barracks,
Well, I was reading about, when I was reading Jennifer's essay, I was reading about the hotel that you stayed in.
Oh.
And I stayed in one that actually was an old barrack that I found out later on one of my trips to Manzanar, which I thought I'm glad I didn't know it at the time that I was there, because the first time I went to Manzanar, it was literally I got this idea on a Tuesday, and so I bought a plane ticket for Friday and just went on my own down there, and it was crazy emotional. So I think if I knew that I was sleeping in the barracks, I would have just lost
No, actually, you bring up a really good point. So and we talked about this, I think, yesterday a little bit. I wanted to say, like, I was in most of these places, I was there with my family by myself, and it is for me, even it was such an emotional experience being there by myself. I would go to these camps, say in the morning on one day, I would go out and scout it out by myself and photograph without the kids and everything, right? And it was, but you could feel the ghosts. You could feel sort of the heaviness, and it's hard to explain. And I wanted to, in my photographs, try to sort of to visualize that. I don't know if it was successful. Maybe some of them I was, but that's something that is, if you don't go, if you're like surrounded by people, it's totally different. I think, I think the pilgrimages are awesome, and you learn a lot, and you get to see the place. But if you have a chance to go on your own, to just stand there and think about what happened here, it's so powerful. It's to me, it's amazing. And I tried to photograph it in that kind of mindset too when I was, in these places. So yeah, and this was one of them, because
that reminds me of a story. Go.
Well, I'm just gonna say that this is such a simple photograph, but I think I felt like a connection immediately to my kid standing there, and there's something wrong with the negative a little bit. I kind of fixed it up and did it in Photoshop, but I mean, this is no, that's a secret. I shouldn't say it, but anyway. I worked on it really hard because I love this image, and this is the only one I have, right, of the kids being like that. And I think that there's, I don't know, it's the combination of their expressions and sort of place, the emptiness, the heart mountain being in the background, and all that. For me, I love this image. I'm glad Emily picked this image actually to put in here, so I'm glad she did that. But anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, it was just, it reminded me when you were talking about your kids, like this generations, right? And I found myself, the first time I went to Minidoka, I went with my dad. And it was funny because I had been to several other camps, and, I decided I'm going to do this project. And so when I was going to go to Minidoka, I was like, oh, I need to bring my dad. And it happened to be, Father's Day was coming up. So I bought him a plane ticket to come with me to Minidoka. And he was like, really? That's my gift? Like,
Yeah.
and I think this was 2000, the year 2000.
Yeah.
Um, and I was like, yeah, but then once we were there, and it was almost, my great grandmother had passed away. My grandmother was still living, but it was almost like we were having kind of a conversation with my great grandma, and
Yeah.
like, how was this for you? And walking along the fence line, there where the canal is, and
Yeah.
thinking about
Yeah.
being in the same space. Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, yeah, the canal is a really important part of that
Yeah.
landscape.
Well, let's go to our last slide here because I think this is a good way to wrap up. So when we were looking at this image and thinking about the children of the camps, I've used this historic image quite a bit in my work, and so I thought it would be nice to kind of juxtapose the two of them and think about. I know it's not the same camp. This is Minidoka and this is Heart Mountain, but that almost like you're invoking history, right?
Yeah, and that was definitely part of my thinking because I had been, I know these images, and Dorothea Lange's images and Ansel Adams' historical images were in my head, and so sometimes consciously, I would make a photograph that I thought maybe referenced Ansel Adams. I did that at Manzanar, and so I would do that. You have to know that history, sort of that visual history, and sometimes it would come out unconsciously. But I just wanted to point out too, I mean, there were some really amazing, you feel this pressure because there's some amazing work made by artists, contemporary artists, who have passed, but they were making work about the camps who I felt the pressure from, like Masumi Hayashi, whose images were amazing, and Patrick Nagatani, who I got to know a little bit, and so we got to talk about his photograph. He goes, "Oh, it looked like mine," and but that's pressure because okay, you want to make something that's a little bit different too, right? But also sort of lean on that history. Joan Myers photographs too, which were, I mean, I don't, there were more a lot of objects and things which I couldn't find, but some of the images in the book that she had, Whispering Silences or something, were images that I would have made.
Yes, I do remember that book.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Well, and I think it's interesting that you're mentioning the legacy because I'm just looking at some notes that Kimiko sent to us, and it looks like the woman from Heart Mountain just passed away recently, and thinking about I definitely have lost quite a few folks in the last few years who were instrumental in my journey discovering the camps.
Yeah, can I mention? I want to mention somebody too. I was photographing. This was the first time I went to in Arkansas, and I photographed Jerome, I photographed a rower, and I was by myself in one of those mornings. I was by myself in the cemetery photographing. Right, so you can't see the cemetery. You go over the great train tracks and you take a long gravel road, and you get the cemetery. So you're in the middle of nowhere, and there's this cemetery, and I'm photographing there, and all of a sudden there's this truck that I see coming from like the other side, and I call my wife. I say, okay, there's somebody coming, and if I don't call you like in a half an hour, call the police. Cause I mean, I don't know. I was, you're scared. So he actually stopped right at the entrance of the cemetery. Big guy, he walked out and he walked straight to me, I'm thinking, oh my gosh. I mean, he wasn't smiling or anything. But he came up and he goes, "Hey, how you doing?" And his name was Don Moss, and he lived at the time the camps were there as a kid, and he lived in the town which was part of Rower, was a little town, and he lived there. But he came up to talk to me, and he was so generous and nice and showed me everything. I wouldn't have been able to see half the things I saw because he took me there. I don't know what's happened to him, but he was this big guy driving a truck. And he actually would just, I never forget this. He left, showed me where the water tank was. He left, he came back, and he handed me a little teapot. He said, I found this teapot in the like the trash area or whatever, and I thought you should have it. I'm like, oh my god, this is like this guy he looks frightening, but I mean I have photographs of him and stuff, but it was I mean that was the first sort of connection with the person that was part of that area, who was so generous with his time, and I'll never forget him. And he wrote back to me and he said, I'll help you with in any way I can. I don't know what's happened to him since, but that was like in 2007. And I sent him some photographs and things. But people like that along the way, just I mean it's amazing, right?
It really is. Yeah, I think about Minidoka. There was, the Hermans, of course, who ended up, when Mr. Herman passed, it was his directive that the Park Service should have first dibs at his property.
Awesome.
And then Francis Egbert, who's passed away as well, but he worked with the Idaho Farm and Ranch Museum, and he took me out to Minidoka and showed me things as well. And yeah, there's so many people, that were not incarcerated or don't have relation to that, but that understood, why we needed to go there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And Don told me a story about like he said he would look through the fence and he goes, wow, there was like a movie theater in there and everything, because really what was happening inside the camp at Roar, it seemed like the life was better there than it was outside, because they still had like outhouses and they were really poor, and and just having these conversations with these people that were there, I mean, it really, you learn so much about the complexity of the situation, and it's not so cut and dried, and really there are some really good people and complicated stories.
Indeed.
Amazing.
Let's go to some of these questions.
Do you have questions? Oh my gosh.
Yeah, there's questions. So the first question we have here from Alice N. What kind of camera do you both use? That's always, you're a photographer. Alice.
Yeah, you want to get into photography. Here we go. So I kind of mentioned it. I have my favorite camera to use is a Mamiya 7, and it has a 50 millimeter lens, because there's a wide angle lens on it. I also have an 80 millimeter lens for that, but I love that camera. But I also use an Atachihara sort of wooden 4x5 field camera, which has a 165, and then I have a nice 90 millimeter lens for that. So those are the two cameras that I actually used for the project, but I like to still use all the time.
Yeah. And I am a snob. I have a Hasselblad.
Yeah. Yeah. What kind of lens do you use?
I shoot. It's interesting. I have I have a 50 and a 80. I think.
Yeah. So just like me. I have a 50 for that wide. I love the wide angle sort of perspective. That's what I use.
And then I shoot digitally quite a bit now, though. I mean, when I re-photographed in 2019, that was the first time I had used the Hasselblad in a little bit, in quite a few years.
I used to have a Hasselblad. I think my wife's angry at me. I mean, I have had a Fuji, and I've had a Hasselblad, and Mamiya is my favorite, but
my car got stolen my last year in undergrad. And with the money I got from the insurance company, I didn't buy a new car. I bought the Hasselblad.
That's awesome. Oh, that's awesome.
Priorities.
Yeah, totally.
But I lived in Seattle at the time, so public transportation was a lot better than.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, we have another question. John Tonai has a question for you, John. How much did you direct the kids? In their
as much as I could. I mean, kids are kids, man. Even if they're your kids, probably if they're your kids, they're harder to sort of direct. Yeah. So, but but I was really fortunate. Lydia was she was into the project a little bit. She kind of understood what was going on, and she understood that she couldn't smile, and she needed to. I said, well, why don't you sit here and do that? And so she understood that. Luke, my son, was 3 years younger, and he was a little bit was harder to direct. So it's actually, you can direct to a certain place, like say stand there, I want you to look at me and all that, and then you have to kind of, you got to go and what happens, and photograph and see what happens, and hopefully you get something, until he runs away. I mean, it's really, I mean, it's not that easy. It's not that easy, especially with your kids, I think. And so I was very fortunate to have Lydia, and Luke is in some photographs that too, where I think his expression is amazing, but a lot of it is because he's pissed at me. And that expression, that sort of ambiguous like hatred, actually is maybe a good expression for a kid, right? I mean, he's not happy being there. But
Well, I feel like that's probably an authentic experience, when you see the historic images of kids getting off those buses, and they're looking around going,
oh my
what the
God,
hell,
yeah. Those places were hot and windy, and we experienced all that when we were there. And yeah, like I said, go stand there, and like I put my daughter at Amachi, I put my daughter behind like this bush where there were like snakes and stuff everywhere, right? Go stand back there. I mean, she wasn't probably happy with me at all, but the expression she had was like, that's perfect, right? Just hold it, boom, 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 And I said, okay, come on now.
So I wonder, now that the kids are older,
Yeah.
right? How do they feel about these images now?
Luke he doesn't really remember that much about it being because he was younger. I think hopefully Lydia's, maybe she's watching, I don't know, but I think that she's not unhappy with these. I think that she sort of likes these. We did go 2018. We did go to New York when the photographs were at ICP and stuff. So they've been to exhibitions where the photographs have been in a show or something, and they were there, and they got to enjoy that, I guess. So it's not like Sally Mann. It's a little different. Doesn't matter, famous or whatever, all over the place.
I'm gonna skip because I think you answered a little bit of one of the questions that's here. But Biff Brigman has a question. Can you tell us one of your biggest personal aha moments while you were visiting one of the sites? We'll leave it to Biff to ask a really hard question.
That's for both of us. You go ahead. I mean, I don't know.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, jeez.
I know.
And actually, I talked a little bit about it. The aha moment for me was at the beginning, because I didn't know what I was doing, right? And it showed up, and I was like, "There's nothing here. There's nothing I can use here in the photographs, right? There's nothing here. I mean, I was planning on using things that I could find, and I know it was aha was like, oh my gosh, these places are desolate and horrible, and I mean, how do you? So and I was struck. I was struck emotionally just by that at Jerome. It hit me, that sort of what happened there, and it comes over you, and it's a physical reaction, For me, that was an aha moment, or a couple, I guess, aha moments about the situation. I hope that answers some of the question, that part of that question. But Emma, your turn. I want to know.
I had a moment like that too. I went to Manzanar first.
Right.
I was actually taking a class specifically about the incarceration at the University of Washington, taught by Tetsu Kashima. So I knew a little bit about what was at the camps, and I had books and things. And so I figured I would go to Manzanar first because I knew there was more there.
Yeah.
So I went there, but then once I saw, and this was before the visitor center, it was part of the park service at that point, but there hadn't been a lot done. I just realized, first of all, Manzanar is so vast, right? You can walk through and it feels so empty. And I just thought, people need to know what this is like.
Yeah.
It's so abstract thinking about, oh, everyone was put in these prison camps, right? But I was like, people need to know what this feels like and what this place is like, you know? And so that kind of solidified that I wanted to go to the other camps, and I needed to bring this back. I needed to bring it back for other people.
Yeah, and they're all different. I mean, like Tule Lake, which is now an airport, you know, and the fire break is the runway, and I have a photograph of Luke, small little Luke, in the middle of that runway. I mean, that space is huge, you know, and if you look at it, you can imagine sort of the barracks on both sides and things, and it's supposed to be a mile square, all of them kind of a mile square, right? Not including the pig farms and things around.
Agriculture, yeah.
Agriculture stuff, you know. So I mean, another aha moment was sort of, you know, how I started thinking about like how these places are being preserved, and they're being preserved differently in different places because of the people surrounding it. Poston was different than Gila River. Gila River was the hardest to get into. I had to actually present my project to the council, and they had to approve my entrance, and I had to make a payment, and then there were 2 guards that traveled with me all around the 2 Gila River sites, and then that was kind of interesting too, because the Native Americans that took us around, they treat that site like it's a sacred space, which for me, and we talked a lot about that, and so how important that place was, you know, for them, and they protected it, you know, and that was interesting to me too, and I didn't realize that would happen, because Poston is a little different. Poston is just out there, you know.
I had not like with the Native American experience that you're talking about, when I went to Amachi in Colorado. So I went on my way to KU to study. You know, I was driving with a friend of mine, you know, all my belongings, and we stopped. We stopped at Heart Mountain, and then we also stopped at Amachi from Seattle to Kansas.
Right. It's a big trip.
And then because Colorado was, I don't know, was it a mere 8-hour drive or something from Lawrence, Kansas? I went back several times, and there was a migrant farm worker area right next to where the block that is, you know, preserved there is placed, and these little kids would, you know, look at me through the fence. They were like, "Wait, what is this lady?" You know, and again, you know, a lot of times Latinx folks speak Spanish to me because I'm racially ambiguous. So, you know, these kids tried to talk to me, you know, and I can't. I'm like, no habla español, you know. But that was a really impactful moment for me. Because they were living in buildings that I assumed were old barracks and quite poverty standards, and right next to a former incarceration camp. And that was quite an aha moment.
Yeah. I remember that space. Yeah. More quiet.
Any more questions?
You could probably talk. I mean, Emily and I could talk for a long time if you guys want, but I think we're at time almost. But
yeah, we're at time. John Tonai, did John answer your question enough about how the trip affected your children? I feel like we talked about that, but
I mean, I don't. Is he writing? I mean, wasn't his question was about sort of the direction of the kids, right?
No, he asked another one, but I'm not sure when it was asked.
Okay.
But it was about, you know, how it affected the kids.
Yeah, I think the kids, Psychologically, I mean, I think it helped Lydia to come to terms and sort of and take ownership and understand sort of herself, so her identity in this place a little bit better. Luke was too young to sort of, I think, get that. I don't know. We need to ask. I need to
You
ask
need to
Lydia, but
ask them.
yeah, but Lydia. I mean, I think Lydia was old enough, and at that point where she was really trying to figure out who she was, right, and to know that to understand that this was part of her history here, growing up in the mainland. That's another thing too. I mean, my experience growing up in Hawaii is different, but her experiences here, growing up in the mainland, she could feel that maybe that's what she was feeling when we started the project, right? That sort of like, oh my gosh, I look different, and who am I? You know, where I fit in, and who am I? So, hopefully, through the, I mean, she came with me to Arizona too, and it was just Lydia and I at Gila River and Poston. So, she's been to every place, you know, and I think that, and I'd like to think that it has helped, but you know, I can ask her and we can talk about that. But is that okay? I don't know.
Let me switch over to the chat here. John says yes.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, yes, John Tonai. Yeah, it answers my question. Yes.
Yeah. Huh. It's so, I mean, this is, for me, it's always an education, these kinds of things, these talks. And because I don't claim to be, I'm not an expert in anything, you know, I mean, and I'm a visual artist too. So, um, yeah, so this is really fascinating. I mean, even talking with Kimiko the other night, and we were talking about other things, was an education and sort of interesting to hear what other people have to say, you know, and their experiences. There's so many different experiences. Everybody had really different experiences. There's no way to sort of, it's hard to sort of, you know, say, hey, this is the way it was. No way, you know, and anyway,
There is one more question, also from John Tonai.
Hey, John.
He says, "How long did it take your project to complete?"
Well, I don't know if it's really complete yet, John. I mean, John, here's the thing. I mean, here's the thing. This is my plug right here. So people who are ever listening can, I photographed 2007 to 2009. I started really making prints after that. I worked with, I needed to figure out a way to present the work in a way that wasn't already done. So I worked with one of my colleagues who writes fiction, and he wrote a piece that sort of, there's a historical fictional piece that sort of weaves my photographs in with the text. And we kind of put a book proposal together. It was designed by Peg Feynman, who was a designer in our department chair. And I think Emily might have seen part of that. But I still,
Do you see that?
What?
Jennifer.
It is complete, John. Okay, yeah. I think that I didn't tell me to publish it. We need a publisher, you know. I think it's an awesome book. If you know anybody who, you know, wants to publish something like this, I mean, contact me, because we have a publishable thing. But actually, I mentioned Jennifer's essay. It's brilliant. Her essay is brilliant, and so maybe there's a way to sort of combine that with the with Brian Raleigh's sort of fictional text into something that would be even better, because I think that the essay that she just recently wrote about, and including my photographs and our trips and stuff, I think it's amazing. I told Emily that I can't finish reading it without like crying. I started crying last night. I mean, I could stop. I can't. It's emotional for me, right? But it also sort of hits a lot of sort of. She sort of writes about things that are it's sort of right on, you know, and powerful, I think. And anyway, that's my plug for my wife's sort of writing, because it is an amazing piece, really. And I think it, you know, I mean, if it can come together in a book form, it would be wonderful. But yeah. So it's not finished yet, John. Come on, publish it for me. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if John can do that, but that would be awesome. Or
Well,
if you don't
John
know.
is a photographer himself, and he has gone to all the camps and photographed
Yeah.
with a Hasselblad, though.
Well, Hasselblad, really a Hasselblad. Jeez. Actually, yeah, sorry, you met him with a Hasselblad. I remember you telling
Yeah,
me
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
He was
Hasselblad
like,
couple.
"Oh, who's that woman over there that has a
And
Hasselblad?"
it's print full frame, so you see little notches on the
I
side. You know
know,
what I
it's
mean?
so annoying,
Oh
isn't
my
it?
gosh. Yeah.
I know. Those of you who are photographers will know what we're talking about. It's kind of a really like an elitist way to print your pictures. But
Although I have a Hasselblad, and I love the way it feels and the way it sounds. It's
you
so,
do have one,
I have an older Hasselblad that
and you don't use it?
no, I love my Mamiya better. I use it
Hmm.
just to play with, and I sometimes just click the shutter and go, wow, that feels awesome. Yeah. Anyway, so
Now I feel like
it's okay, John.
we're
You're good, bud.
imitating Jerry Seinfeld and his like comedians in cars uh, show or something.
Comedians in cars.
Oh,
What?
it's this show you can watch. It's half an hour, and they get old cars and they talk about old cars and
Oh,
comedy.
jeez.
And drink.
You know what I like better? Andy Bumata used to do a show where he would talk to people in a car. I think it was Andy in Hawaii. Andy Bumata, do you know him?
I
Comedian.
don't.
Well, you should. Well,
I didn't grow up in
I
Hawaii.
know
So.
he does the whole like pigeon English thing, and he's one of my favorite comedians, right? He rides motorcycles and things now, and he has stuff online. But Andy Bumata, you can look him up.
All right, I think we have completely digressed, so that
Oh
must
yeah,
mean that we are done.
yeah.
Kimiko, is that the
Okay.
case?
So yeah, so cut us off, John. Nice to meet you, bud. Thank you.
All right, the hook is coming out. So thank you everyone so much. Let's give a
Yeah.
round of applause to the whole Tadaima crew
Good.
for
Yeah.
putting together all of these fantastic
Yeah.
panels and presentations.
Thank you, Emily. Yeah, it's been an honor, really. It's been.
Oh, it's great to get to talk to you about photography. I feel like we don't actually do that very often.
Well, yeah, we can. We live close. We live close.
I know.
I do it. Sure.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, good night, everyone.
Good night.